Hello cuties and welcome back to the YouTube channel. I am very excited that you are here because today I'm going to be introducing you to 5 books that helped me find my way when I was overwhelmed or when I just didn't feel like I was where I needed to be. And it's a very scary space to be in. So before I get going though, there's a few things I want to talk about when it comes to reading books. And I think this is really important for people to understand. Number one is that however you read is a good way to read. Okay, so whether you're listening to audiobooks, reading it on a Kindle or whatever, or reading it in the form of a paperback or a hardcover novel, all are valid ways of reading. And I know this isn't something that needs to be said, but I feel sometimes that people feel a bit odd. Or that they're not doing it right. So I'm just here to let you know that however you get your information is the right way to get it, as long as it gets the outcome that you're wanting, right? Consuming information. That's it. The second thing is, as somebody that always prided themselves on being the smart one, books became my trophies. And this is something I realized about 3 years ago when I would do my lives. There would be a bookshelf behind me showing you all my trophies, showing you all the books that I've read. And I realized I was attached to those books because it symbolized how smart I was, or it would help people evaluate me as a educated speaker or teacher or whatever. Just look at me and be like, oh, she reads so much. She's fancy. And I know that sounds silly and whatever, but I know I'm not alone in this, and you might be somebody else that didn't realize that you were doing this as well. Because when it came time for me to realize, like, well, I've read them, why do I need to hang on to them? It was very difficult for me to part with my books. And I was like, why is it so hard for me to part with these? And I realized it's because they represented my brilliance or smartness or intelligence. And I know for me that that is an identity I've held my whole life as the smart one. And so I need evidence and proof that I am in fact the smart one. And so I just had to reshape the belief to say, like, I am smart. I am intelligent. I am doing the things that I need to do to feel like that, instead of like, this book makes me this way, like holding on to the tangible thing that I think gives me the feeling. So what I want to encourage you to do is something that I've done. Because of that smartness, I always felt like, oh, if I could just show people I've read X amount of books, then they'll think I'm so smart. I wasn't actually retaining much of the information that was packed into books, right? Even though I'd highlight, even though I'd remember certain things, main things, my brain would filter out a lot of it, and I wouldn't remember it until I'd go back maybe and look at a book and be like, oh wow, there's this whole section that I totally forgot about. And so now what I've been doing is only challenging myself to read 1 chapter a day. That's it. So I don't have necessarily a book limit that I want to achieve by the end of the year. Instead, I want to just read 1 chapter a day. And now, because I'll usually have 2 books on the go, because how I read in the morning or the way my brain processes in the morning takes in very different stuff than evening brain. My evening brain cannot do with overly conceptual thinking. It's just not possible. Morning brain is more likely to do that. So I have 2 books on the go, but my goal is to only read 1 chapter of each a day. If I want to read a bit more, I can, but there's no pressure. And then what I've noticed by doing this is that it has actually allowed me to start applying what I'm learning from the books, because learning is great. Don't get me wrong. Taking in all this information is great, but if you're not going to apply it or not see or ponder or give yourself space to think about how these things connect or whatever, then retaining the information just for the sake of retaining it is kind of like hoarding a little bit. And so we want to make sure that if you're taking it in, you're also putting it out, right? So that's what I want to encourage you to do, is slow down on the reading a little bit, give it some time, and take your time processing. There is no race to finish a bajillion books. There is no, book award club, I don't think, for finishing the most books by the end of the year. It really is just like, did I retain what I wanted to retain from reading these things? That's just my thought. I mean, that goes more so for books that I should specify. I mean, if you're reading fiction novels or science, mystery novels, that's a bit different because that's like for joy and play and fun. So I don't think you have to retain anything. But the books that I read tend to be more self-development or things that I want to apply. So those types of books I actually want to sit with and think about so I can apply them. All right, let's get into it, shall we? So I'm going to do a countdown starting with number 5 and move my way down to number 1. So the number 5 book that kind of went, so again, today's books are going to be focusing on when I felt stuck and not quite where I was supposed to be, right? Like where I stayed too long in a certain situation but was scared to make a transition, or I was scared to make a choice that I knew I had to make but didn't know how, or if I was being asked to be somebody that I wasn't, how could I become, get closer to who I was authentically. So that's what today's books are going to focus on, is the ones that help me get closer to me. So the first book we're going to talk about, number 5, is Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. Of course, Elizabeth Gilbert is the author of Eat, Pray, Love, but Big Magic is one that many creatives talk about as reading as one that really stands out to them. A few of my favorite pieces in here talk about how when we have ideas, we are being asked by the universe to create it, but if the timing's not right for us, or that, that we let our fears get in the way, then the idea will just move on to somebody else. And I think what this book gave me permission to do was to not feel that I had to get everything out, but more importantly, not feel jealous when other people would create the thing or the idea that I had but never executed on. Because there was a point in my life where I would, I want to do X, Y, and Z, but I would have a limiting belief that would get in my way, or I wouldn't do it, or I'd put it off because other things took precedence. Like I would stay away from that, and then somebody else would create it or do the thing the way that I thought of it, and I'm like, of course, they took my idea. No, the universe moved on to somebody that was ready to execute. So it let me realize that if my idea is executed by somebody else, at least somebody is doing it. And that is not to say they stole it. That is, the universe gave it to them because they would get it done in the way that it's meant to get done in the right time it's meant to get done. Because ideas are just ideas until you put them into action. And so that is the main takeaway that I got from this book. But overall, I think being a creative is really hard in the world that we live in. And so this book really just reinforces that it's okay to have a creative mind, to feel things deeper than a lot of people, to imagine things, and it doesn't make you worse off in the world. And yeah, I just think it's really important to understand that when we read books like this, it can reinforce our humanity as creatives. And so that's what this book did. So number 5, Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. Cool. All right. I'm like, I can't spend too much time on these because we only have a few minutes, All right. So the next book, which is one that I pull out time and time again because I find it hard to read straight through, is Women Who Run with Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who is an amazing writer. You'll find this usually in the feminist section of your bookstore. It is full of stories and what do they call them? Like fables and things like that, and then what it means to be. And now why this book helped me, again, as somebody that is a creative, when I was working, a soul-sucking job, or even when I was in photography and photographing clients the same all the time, this reminded me that I have creativity in me, and when I don't serve that creativity, my soul dies. Like when I do what I'm supposed to do instead of letting myself explore creatively, my soul dies. And actually, if you go back in YouTube, I'll try to link it here, but in 2019, my end of year project, I used a quote from here about when the river gets polluted, essentially. And yeah, it talks about creativity that way. So this book was really, really profound for me. It also helps me Yeah, it helps because I still read it sometimes. It also helps me with topics of body image and things like that because it reminds you of all the obstacles that have been in the way for folks that have been socialized as women, what our natural way of existing is, and then how we're taught to be something different, and how by doing that we are removing ourselves from ourselves. So, a really great read. I know a lot of people reference this book, but I'm not kidding when I tell you, like, it's not just a book that you take an Instagram photo of. Like, I actually encourage you to read it. There's a lot of really good stuff in here, and I'm actually looking, I think Miss Clarissa does writing workshops, and my bucket list is to attend one of her workshops because she's fierce as hell. So lots of good stories in here. It is a bit theoretical, so, you know, take your time with it. It's a good one. Lots of highlights. This is a book that I give away, you know, when I'm like, oh, you need to read this. That's the book. Okay, number 3. Yes, 5, 4. 3 is Martha Beck's The Way of Integrity. And this book was really great and came about, 1-2 years ago? Actually, it'll probably say in here. Anyways, I found it like 2 years ago, but why I love it is because it talks about, again, when you're feeling this stuckness, like where you're doing a job or you're in a relationship or you just feel stifled in your life, this book has practical steps on how to connect more with who you are supposed to be. And so it's not as easy as like quit the job and break up with your boy. Well, it can be that easy. That's literally what I did do, but that's for the number 1 book. But essentially, you want to take your time. So there's different activities in here. There's different exercises, meditations, and things like that where you get to become self-aware and start to harness that inner voice of yours that has probably been silenced for a bit of time. And if you go through this book slowly, take your time with the questions, actually do the work and journal it, you might come around to find that that voice inside you is asking for something specific. And if we can just entertain that voice, even just a little more than we currently do, you're going to be in a much better place. So that's what I want to encourage people to do. If you read this, Martha Beck, The Way of Integrity, take the time and do the journal prompts. Literally sit with the information and see what comes of it for you. Reinforce the power within you and get to know who you truly are, because that's when you start to uncover what are your needs and how do I ask for them and what boundaries do I need to set and how do I do that. But we can't do that if we don't know who we are in the first place. So this book comes in at number 3. Okay, so number 2 is, this one's kind of like a shorter read and not necessarily a front to back kind of read. And this is Paulo Coelho's Warrior of the Light. And this book I fell into mostly because, you'll see number 1, is I feel that I am somebody who kind of is empathetic, but definitely falls over to that wooey side of things where I can connect with things greater than myself. I see visions a lot. I sometimes see colors around people, or I can tell you what color people are. I feel that I'm here to do a very specific job. I believe this is one reason why I've never wanted to have children, because I have a different plan. Like ever since I was a little kid, I know that there's something that I'm meant to do. So this is just like me ever since being a little kid. I have always felt that there was a calling, and I believe that I am a warrior of the light. And so this book, in times when I felt really dark and that I wasn't able to do that, this book helped reinforce that this is me. This is what I do. This is who I am. And when I first started dating my husband, who's a robot, if you don't know, I was like, read this. This is all you need to know about me. This will tell you everything you need to know. And he did in fact read it, which is why it's like bookmarked. He did not finish it. Interesting. He was probably like, what the hell is this lady? I mean, he stuck around, so he can't be that bad, right? But I think it's just like, it just reminds you when things are hard, because I believe being a warrior of the light is not an easy task. You're fighting an uphill battle for your whole life. You have to make certain sacrifices, like not having children necessarily. Some people can be a warrior of the light and still have children. That just isn't my path, I believe. And it just helps me stay grounded in doing the work, showing up, not being held to the outcome, staying focused on who I'm like, connecting with one person a day, if that's you listening, hi, connecting with one person a day to help them feel seen, then I know my light is doing its job. So this book helped me reinforce that it's okay to be different, and it's okay to be extremely sensitive, and it's okay to have gone through some really difficult things. And because of this book, I was able to kind of take those difficult things and say, how now can I use this information to help other people, which is why I now educate. So, yeah. That is this book. So, book number 1, I'm going to use this because, not the cover, but I'm going to use Paulo Coelho because his book, The Alchemist, of course, is the biggest catalyst that changed my life. And why don't I have a copy of the book if it was so life-changing? Because I gave it away. Again, I have bought that book no less than 10 times in my life. Because every time somebody comes to me and says, oh, I'm having a really hard time, I'm really stuck in my job or my life, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, I know that I'm supposed to be doing something different, but I don't know how to do it, I'm like, you need to read this book. And so I literally send them my copy with a lovely little note attached to it. But Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist is the book that literally changed my life and set me on a path to being more myself. The most myself I could ever ask for. And what happened was, I was working in insurance, yes. I had just gotten a job working, I'd gotten out of the job where I worked for a weight loss company, because I knew that ain't it. In order to get a bridge job, and I call it a bridge job because I knew it wasn't going to be forever. I just knew I needed something that could still pay the bills, because I had bought a house. So I had a house, I had a boyfriend that was caring enough, but wasn't right for me, the real me, necessarily. I had a steady job, which was great, but I felt very unfulfilled in my life. I felt like I had settled. I was confused because I was like, well, I have everything they told me I should want. I have the house, I have the partner, I have money in my bank account, I have a good job, but there's something else. There's got to be something else, which goes back to that when I was talking about that, where I always felt there was something else that I needed to be doing. And it was in my training class for the insurance class that one of the other attendees that was training with me, he was reading The Alchemist and trying to just have general conversation. I was like, oh, what you reading? I like books. And he's like, oh, this is a really good book about the alchemist. I was like, what's it about? He's like, this guy that goes on a pilgrimage and like learns all this stuff. And the guy was trying to be a filmmaker. So I was like, creative person, cool. Like, let's get to know each other. So he gave me his copy after he had finished reading it. And I literally remember being in my bathtub, in the first page, I highlighted the first page, like, incredibly. And I knew then and there, sitting in that bathtub in the house that I owned with my partner at the time in the room next to me, and I broke down in tears and I was like, there's more for me. And in that moment, I didn't tell anybody. I knew for myself, I was like, okay, I need to start making steps. And so in reading that book, it was the book that changed my trajectory. I knew that my path was not the same path as most people. I knew I am not the person to do what you should do. I do not want to follow the crowd. And let me show you something. When I was in grade 6, I used to love cutting out, I still love cutting out magazines. When I was in grade 6, there was a Nike ad that featured a saying that says, people who lead want to, people who follow have to. And in grade 6, I cut it out and I laminated it with tape. But I have kept this with me since grade 6 because I knew that I was meant to be a leader of some kind. And I knew that I had a special mission in the world. I knew that I was different for some whatever reason, but I knew it wasn't a bad thing. I knew it was something that would become of use at some point in my life. And it did. But the thing was, I had to stay true to myself in order to do this. And so that's why I've kept this whole time, because it reminds me of what I'm here to do, even when things get hard, in order to make the hard decisions. And so that's why The Alchemist is book number 1, because it reminded me of that girl in grade 6 that said, there's something more for me. There's something big that I'm supposed to do. And big doesn't mean reach a bajillion people, which, cool, if I do that, that's great. But it means having an impact on the world. And that could be one person, that could be you watching this right now. If you drastically change your life because of maybe one of the books that I said, then that will have been worth it. It might be somebody that I talked to at the grocery store that was having a really shitty day and maybe was going to do something that wasn't super, good. And I was like, hey, and I made them feel human in that moment. And so they didn't go do that terrible thing. That's a pretty big fucking impact. So it reminds me that I'm meant to stay true to who I am, no matter how difficult it gets. And that's what The Alchemist gave to me. It was like, you're doing all the things you should do, but that's not what you are supposed to do, right? So society says you should do this, but you are not meant to be what society says you're supposed to be. You are meant to be yourself. And that was the first book that made me realize that who I was okay. And I had to start the process of talking to myself, of getting to know myself and understand, who is she? So yeah, those are my top 5 books. You can get them anywhere books are sold for the most part. Again, I will list them in the description below. If you can, I recommend supporting your local and independent bookstores if they have them. Try to avoid the Amazon if you can, just because, let's give the money to somebody that could use it to keep their bookstores alive. I don't know, just saying. But yeah, if you like this, if you want to know more of what I'm reading, business books, anything like that, let me know. And I am more than happy to tell you what those books are, because this is a fun series for me because I love to read. So yeah, cool. All right. So thank you for sticking with me, and I will see you next week. Bye.